It's here, the EOS R5C, a camera that has long been rumored around the internet, and now we know for a fact that this camera exists, and we also know all the specifications that this camera has. And obviously I haven't had this camera in my hand yet to test out, but I will do in the future. But for now, what I want to do is I want to address all the shortcomings that the EOS R5 had, and I recently made a video about that. I retired the EOS R5 for video and I'm not using it anymore because I replaced it with a Canon C70 because it had a lot of shortcomings. Now obviously Canon addressed a lot of these shortcomings with the EOS R5C. So in this video I want to compare the two, and if my mind has changed now that a lot of these shortcomings obviously have gone away. More on that after the intro. My name is David Cooper and welcome to Monkey Fish. If you haven't watched the video where I talked about the EOS R5 and why I'm not using it anymore, you can watch it right now, but you don't have to, so I will just give you a number of reasons that I addressed in that video. And that is overheating, the ergonomics of the body, the audio, the really hard to edit files, as well as C-Log 2 and matching it to other cameras, then the dynamic range overall, the internal ID filters, the lack of ports for professional use, and last but not least, client perception. So now let's start with overheating, because I do a lot of long form content and I used to use the EOS R5 as my B camera to my Canon C300 Mark III when shooting interviews and such long form content. And I couldn't do this with the EOS R5 because it kept overheating on me, and it also had a 30-minute record limit. Obviously that has been fixed with the EOS R5C. It has an active cooling system now, it does have a fan, it won't overheat according to Canon, and it also doesn't have a 29-minute 59-second record limit anymore. So obviously that has been fixed, and now this is not an argument anymore. A major complaint that I had with the EOS R5 were the really hard to edit and way too large files. And that obviously has been addressed as well, because before, when we were shooting for our own client, it didn't really matter that much because we had our own workarounds or we were just using our M1 Max. But when being hired as a DP and shoot for a director and then just basically transferring the footage after the shoot, you can't really give them really compressed small H.265 files that they can't edit on their computers. That has been addressed by Canon. Now we have the common XFAVC codec that works very well. We also have a new RAW Lite codec, actually in 3 different formats: 12-bit RAW, we have RAW LT and ST. We obviously still have to see how easy they are to edit, but overall I think that has also been addressed and is not an issue anymore, and I think that is a really good step in the right direction. Another big problem I had with the EOS R5 were the audio solutions. Of course, it doesn't have any XLR inputs, but that wasn't the biggest issue I had with it, but not having timecode was, because we're doing a lot of multi-camera interviews, multi-camera shoots, and I usually use timecode for everything, with lavalier mics, with external shotgun microphones, and it's so easy to sync everything up in post. With the EOS R5, I didn't have that option. With the EOS R5C, it does feature a timecode import, and that is a huge step towards a professional camera that I can use for video work. So good job, Canon. The other XLR inputs, now we also have addressed in a way, because there is an external module that you can put on top of the camera via the hot shoe, and then you have XLR ports, which is also a really cool addition to it. However, the way I would shoot with a camera needing an XLR port when wanting to shoot running gun documentary style, I usually have a cage, I have a top handle, so overall I'm not 100% sure if that would work, so we will need to see if there's some kind of solutions for this with external third-party cages and top handles that can implement this module. We will have to see, but again, it's a really good step up that we do have an option at all. Another thing that I addressed was the missing C-Log 2, and when matching it to the Canon C70 or the C300 Mark III, you only get C-Log 3, so you do have to do some matching in post. which never really was the biggest issue that I had with the camera, because it's still fairly easy to match the cameras, even though one shoots in C-Log 3 and one shoots in C-Log 2. But that leads me to my next point, and that is dynamic range, because you're also missing out on dynamic range when you only get C-Log 3 when shooting in XFAVC. And overall, the sensor of the EOS R5C is the same as the EOS R5, and without having tested it in real life, I would assume, and I'm pretty sure, it's the exact same dynamic range. And for me, dynamic range is such a huge point when getting a professional cinema camera. And according to Canon spec sheets, the EOS R5C will feature 14 stops of dynamic range, whereas the C300 Mark III and the C70 features 16 to 17 stops of dynamic range. Those are obviously all just advertising numbers and not really real life, but we can still tell that the C70 as well as the Canon C300 Mark III will have 2 to maybe even 3 stops more of dynamic range than a Canon EOS R5C. And that has always been the biggest drawback when it comes to using the EOS R5 for professional video. Because once you shot on the C70 or the C300 Mark III, you really don't want to miss these extra stops of dynamic range. Another thing I addressed in my last video was the overall body and the ergonomics. And although it has gotten a little bit thicker and now the camera has somewhat of a booty with the external cooling system, it's still a small mirrorless camera. Especially when using bigger lenses like the RF28-70 for example, or even cine lenses, then it's really hard to get a nice balanced rig with an EOS R5 or even the EOS R5C. That being said, maybe there will be some V-mount solutions for this camera, because in case you haven't noticed, that you can shoot 8K 60 in this camera, which is absolutely amazing, but you do need an external power source. It's interesting to see if a V-mount battery would actually count as an external source, and if that is the case, then we could maybe build a rig with a V-mount battery and then make the whole thing way more into an actual cinema camera. But that begs the question, why not get an actual cinema camera then, because then you don't really have the advantage of having a hybrid camera. But I will talk about this in another video. But overall, the body is still the same, and when shooting long documentaries, which I often do, then I really need a well-balanced rig, and with the EOS R5C that's still not the case. And that leads me to the next point, and that is obviously kind of a stupid one, and that is client perception. Because if you show up with a big cinema camera, cine lenses, as well as matte boxes and V-mount batteries, it just impresses the client a little bit more. And I actually had a job where overall they were just so impressed with all the gear that we lugged there that I got more work from it, but that's a whole different story. But overall, yes, client perception sometimes does matter if you show up with a really big camera or a camera that looks like a stills camera like the EOS R5. But overall, again, this is more of a stupid and really small reason. So now let's talk about the biggest problem that I had with the EOS R5 and still have with the EOS R5C, and that is the missing internal ND filters. My C70 had one, my Canon C300 Mark III had one, and the EOS R5C doesn't. And that is a really big shame, because that just makes everything a lot more complicated, especially in a camera that is designed for hybrid shooting. Because if you have ND filters, either as an adapter in between the lens and the sensor, or via a matte box or screw-on filters, it kind of takes away the whole idea of having a hybrid camera. There's also not a lot of variable ND filters that are really high quality, because a lot of them have green tints or X-polarization pattern problems. And overall, just using screw-on filters is such a turn-off, and it just makes your life a lot harder when shooting on set, especially when shooting run and gun. So this is a feature that I'm missing on a dedicated cinema camera, which the EOS R5C, hence the name C, should kind of be. So the missing ND filters are still there, and yeah, that is one thing that I really don't like about the EOS R5C. And last but not least, the missing ports. Yes, we do get timecode now, but other than that, we don't really have a lot more ports than we had before. There's still a micro HDMI port, which I really don't understand, and I hate the fact that it does have a micro HDMI port. As a matter of fact, on Belle's EOS R5, she had that port broken twice. My HDMI port on my C300 Mark III is broken now. So having a cinema camera with a micro HDMI port is just something I don't understand, and at least give us a full-size HDMI port. Other than that, yes, we did get timecode, but we didn't really get any more audio features. We don't really have any audio dedicated levels that we can change on the camera body. We still have to go inside of the camera. So overall, not a lot has changed when it comes to that, and it's still, well, a mirrorless camera. So now, after having compared this to the EOS R5 and all of the things that I didn't like about the EOS R5, let's talk about the camera itself, what I think about it, and also whom I think this camera is for. So overall, this camera really is a weird one, but I really do like where they're going with this. Now you can switch between video and photo, but when you switch to video mode, you have an actual menu of the Canon C70, which is really video dedicated, and I love that. You also have a lot of implementations into the software, like shutter angle, you have false color, you have waveforms, so a lot of things that you want in an actual cinema camera, and that brings it a lot closer to a camera like the Canon C70, for example. At the price point, also being able to shoot stills, it's an actual hybrid camera that doesn't overheat, has no recording limits, and a lot of really cool things. The 8K, however, it's nice to have. I still think that the 8K codecs, no matter what you shoot it on, XF-AVC or the raw light, LT, ST, whatever, will still not be able to be edited on any of our recent computers. The file sizes are still insane, especially when you shoot 8K 50 or 8K 60. So the usability of that codec and the 8K overall is still questionable. I would love to have an 8K camera with manageable file sizes that are easy to edit on the computers that we have, but I don't think the EOS R5C will be that. But overall, it's still cool to have, and when it comes to future-proofing your camera, then this is obviously a step in the right direction. As a B camera to a camera like the C70, the C300 Mark III, I think it's nearly perfect. It's a high-quality video camera with a lot of cool features dedicated to video, but it's also small, lightweight, great autofocus that you can throw on a gimbal. And as an addition, it also shoots stills if you need that once in a while. So yes, I think this is a great B camera to a dedicated cinema camera. Me personally, as my main video camera, I still prefer a C300 or a Canon C70, but I will upload a video dedicated to this and compare the C70 to the EOS R5 and which should you get for video. But overall, as a B cam to one of these cameras, I think the EOS R5C is absolutely amazing, and they got rid of most of the shortcomings that I had with the EOS R5 in the past. Now let's talk about it being an actual hybrid camera. So if you're one of those guys that just wants one camera that shoots both, stills as well as video, you switch between, you travel a lot, then I think the EOS R5 is now the perfect hybrid camera, especially if you're more on the video side and you do need a stills camera from time to time. Then I think right now there's nothing better out there than the EOS R5C. For the price point especially, I think this is an absolute steal, and if you're a guy that shoots a lot of video but also needs a still camera, that doesn't want to lug around a lot of camera gear, then this is definitely the perfect camera right now. Another thing I want to address real quick is the missing IBIS, because as far as I understood, the camera doesn't have IBIS anymore, and it only has a digital version of stabilization like the C70 and all the other cinema cameras. It doesn't feature the actual IBIS anymore. For me, this is something that I really don't mind. I actually didn't like the IBIS. You got a lot of this wobble stabilization feeling, and I never really used IBIS because, again, I shoot on cinema cameras. I'm used to shooting with cameras that don't have in-body stabilization, and overall I like to have more control over my image, so I never really liked this. So for you, this might be a problem because you're used to it, but for me personally, I actually think that it was a good idea to get rid of the in-body stabilization and add the digital stabilization, because that actually worked quite well when I used it in the past on some run and gun shoots, and overall this is something that I wouldn't miss. So this was my first impression and my opinion on the EOS R5C, especially compared to the previous EOS R5 for video work. So now I want to know from you guys, is this a step up? And if you already own an EOS R5, do you trade it in for the EOS R5C? And do you think that this is the perfect hybrid camera? And what else would you have wished for Canon to implement into this camera other than C-Log 2 and a full-size HDMI port? So this is it. If you like this video, then please give it a like, because it really helps the channel grow. And if you want to see more about the EOS R5C, because I will do a full review, I will do some tests once I actually have this camera in my hand, then subscribe for more, and I hope to see you on the next one.